What do people get wrong about product market fit?
One, I think people think there's some magical nirvana moment where like, boom, we have fit. There's a set of indicators that I guess lean in one direction or the other. The second biggest misconception I see is that people think you can't lose it, and you can. Just a warning to all you startups out there, like with the AI revolution coming along, you can lose it. When I say lose it, I also mean existing companies have amazing fit when they bring on new products, new modules, new add-ons. They think that magically you get like carryover product. You don't. Just because your core product has fit does not mean your add-ons have fit yet.
If you're a seller, hearing that your company is moving to a product-led growth motion might make you nervous because it could shift focus away from the sales methods and comp structures that you're used to. PLG models often require more emphasis on data analysis and understanding your customer behavior. Two things that reps and managers might not have the skills or the tools to do too well. Many people hear product-led growth and think, this product sells itself. But as our guest today explains, that's a common misconception. The product is a critical piece for driving business growth and customer acquisition, but that doesn't happen without a number of revenue-critical employees. Todd Olson, founder and CEO of Pendo, literally wrote the book on product-led growth motions. He's been leading Pendo since 2014 and is the author of The Product-Led Organization, Drive Growth by Putting Product at the Center of Your Customer Experience. Today, he's sharing with Kyle the secrets to running a human-led sales motion that pairs perfectly with product-led growth.
I'm Kyle Coleman, sales pro turned SVP of marketing at Clary. Run Revenue is the show where revenue pros learn to stop revenue leak, achieve revenue precision, and grow their companies and careers.
This is Run Revenue Show with Kyle Coleman.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Run Revenue Show. I am thrilled to be joined today by the CEO and founder of Pendo, Mr. Todd Olson. Todd, how you doing?
Great. Thanks for bringing me on, Kyle.
Absolutely. Yeah, looking forward to this conversation. I want to start just by framing it up and giving everybody a little bit of a background of who you are and where you've been, because you've done a lot of different things. And in fact, Pendo is not the first company that you've co-founded. You, I believe, maybe I'm wrong about this, but right out of college is when you co-founded your first company. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think technically age 20, so I couldn't quite drink yet, but yeah. So I've been doing this, basically, for a long time.
Love that. Old enough to go to war, old enough to buy a pack of cigarettes, old enough to start a company, not old enough to drink. Very impressive. So you were there for a little while, and then you moved on to Borland, chief scientist at Borland. You're VP of product at a couple of different companies, including most recently Rally Software. And then you co-founded Pendo. This is your third venture. I'm curious, just to kick things off, what were your main learnings? Like, what would you tell other folks who are entrepreneurial or are thinking about starting a company? What kind of high-level advice would you give to them based on your journey?
A lot of lessons through that. I think like one of the most important lessons is I learned the importance of product market fit early on. Before I read Steve Blank's 4 Steps to the Epiphany, I think there's this vision that we just built something and threw it out there and magically everything worked. And this was like certainly the early days of .com and then even a bit beyond. I think that book helped crystallize this concept of product market fit, better validation and product exploration. And you got to remember, like the Lean Startup, all those things, they're relatively recent books, recent historically speaking. So last, I guess 20-ish years, maybe 15, 20-ish years. So a lot of that concept just didn't exist when I started my first companies. And of course, now everyone's like, this is of course the way you do it. And it's like best practice. But, when I was 20, there wasn't that conversation, so to speak, in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And it's awesome that it is now. So that's like one of the big pieces. Look, I think the other big piece, and it's still something I'm learning and growing in, is managing people. Certainly in technology businesses, we're a people business. I always joke with our teams, we don't have factories and, machines building things. We're humans. Like humans are our core assets of our business, and managing humans, unlocking the potential of humans, it's like a lifelong learning journey for me. And I've learned a lot over the years. I'm certainly a better, more seasoned manager today than I was back in my 20s. But that isn't to say that I have all the answers going forward either.
Super helpful and a really nice little primer into the main meat of our show today, which is we're going to be talking about product-led growth and product-led sales. And to hear you say that one of your main lessons is really thinking through product market fit, I want to kind of start on the inverse, Todd, and ask you, what do people get wrong about product market fit, where have you seen people struggle?
I think a couple things. One, I think people think there's some magical nirvana moment where like, boom, we have fit. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. There's a set of indicators you have that I guess lean in one direction or the other, but I think there is no magic moment, and then sometimes people who speak at conferences will try to say, oh, once you have 10 independent friends using your product, you have magically fit. No, I did not find it to be that simple. It wasn't until like a few years ago where I was at a board dinner. I think it was just after COVID, our first in-person back. So that would have been like early 21, maybe late 20, probably early 21. I was at a board dinner with a board member, and I was describing a situation where we have sales reps, and I was describing to our board member that this very young rep, say 23 years old, was in a one-on-one with me talking about how she got on a phone with a prospect. First call, close the deal in a single 30-minute phone call. And that's when the board member looked like, well, that's amazing product market fit. And it probably didn't dawn on me till just a few years ago how good our fit was. And granted, we've been around for a while, and we've certainly scaled the business, so one could argue we knew we had it, but I don't think I knew how good we had it until you hear these stories and the third party says, well, it's really, really good fit. So I think that's the first misconception. I think the second biggest misconception I see is that people think you can't lose it, and you can. I mean, just a warning to all you startups out there, like with the AI revolution coming along, some technology innovations are more, actually exciting / dangerous, depending on what market you're in than others. But I think keeping abreast of where you are and fit, super, super important. When I say lose it, I also mean existing companies have amazing fit when they bring on new products, new modules, new add-ons. They think that magically you get like carryover product. You don't. Sometimes the new module has really crappy fit and you don't sell it. And you're like, why aren't people buying my upgrade module? Just because your core product has fit does not mean your add-ons have fit yet. I think these are all like the most common misconceptions I see. But look, it's best to obsess over it. Obsess over it. It'll pay off many, many dividends.
It's super impressive. I love so much about what you just said, Todd, that new products that you're introducing, you can't grandfather in product market fit from your core product. So really make sure you're as scrupulous as you were in founding, or rolling out the initial product or whatever it may be. And I want to drill into that for a moment, Todd. When you were thinking of starting Pendo, or maybe after you started Pendo, what steps did you take to understand the market and to design the product? How much time were you spending with customers? Were there other folks that you were learning from? What was your approach?
Yeah, look, every time you conceive of ideas, first it's wise to do a little bit of validation, talk to people. So we did that. And that was peers, friends, colleagues, random people that are in the industry I'd reach out to on LinkedIn or other means. We go to conferences and just chat with people. Then as I started raising capital, you start getting introduced to people via investors, portfolio companies, advisors, et cetera. So it's always that piece. I think at some point, you just got to get something out there. There's only so much talking you can do. Like, you have to ship something. And especially if people don't quite get it or aren't keeping up, or if what you're doing is in some way very, very new. And Pendo, I think what was unique about our value proposition early on is that we have a broad platform. And until you saw how these things went hand in hand, it was kind of hard to realize the overall value. So we basically built a prototype or first version and got it out there. And we had it available as alpha, and it was free. And, our investors would say, well, how long is it going to be free for? It's like, well, until we get some level of fit and we can find someone willing to pay for it, it's going to be free. And I think us being very disciplined that we weren't going to rush it was key. But what we did was we shipped it. We started onboarding beta, alpha users, and then we just obsessed over these people. What were they doing? What were they not doing? We would do, generally speaking, weekly calls with every person using our product. And it wasn't until, it was probably about 6-8 months later after our first delivery that we got a slide deck sent back to us. And the slide deck had all these screenshots from Pendo. And we're like, well, that's a good sign. And it was like either a board deck or an executive deck. And then when you realize people are showing their boards, like our numbers, you realize, oh, well, they're using it and getting value out of it, or they wouldn't be doing it. And that's when we started to shift the conversation of, oh, maybe you should pay for this thing that you're showing your board. Getting it for free, may not be the best course of action here. So, and then that's how we sort of shifted. But I think that discipline, that obsession over making sure people are getting value out of it, how are they getting value, I think was really, really key.
And for folks who may not know, this is working. Pendo founded, I believe, 2014. And I think last I saw, you have 2,300 customers. You have almost 1,000 employees. You've raised over, I think, 350 million in venture funding. So you're doing a lot, quite right. And one of the main things that you're doing, Todd, is I think you were on the kind of before the curve on product-led growth. You've literally written a book on it. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But first, let's level set a little. Define product-led growth for us. What does it mean to you to be product-led?
We define product-led a little more broadly than I think some others do. I think generally speaking, we think of the concept of product-led as companies who put product at the center of the customer experience. It's not just core, but each and every department can leverage the product to do some aspect of its job, of which growth or sales is certainly one aspect of it. And now when people think about product-led growth, they're typically associating with companies that have some sort of like very low touch to no touch, go-to-market model where you're acquiring and converting customers without or with a very reduced need for human beings. And that's, we think of like the Zooms and the Dropboxes and, probably MailChimps at this point. We think a lot of those companies as very much, or Calendly is another great example, as PLG-based companies. I think for us, it's even broader than that because, there's aspects of product-led that you could apply to customer success. For example, making sure customers use your product or understand how to onboard. There's aspects of support or, with respect to self-service that are really, really good candidates for being product-led. But I think those are all in some overarching umbrella, and it's all about how that product becomes central to the customer experience.
One of the main things I see from folks who are studying a product-led, and we'll talk about PLG, product-led growth, because that's kind of the most popular initialism for this little craze right now. And a lot of the times I see people say, we're going to pursue a PLG, a product-led growth strategy, because our product sells itself. And I believe that that's a bit of an unintended consequence. I believe that's not exactly the way that things go. But talk to us a little bit about that and maybe even correct this misnomer. Like, can the product truly sell itself, or what has to happen for, this product-led strategy to really take root and grow?
Yeah, look, I think in some, say, consumer products, maybe the overall product experience can lead to some level of conversion event. But most products, in particular B2B products, I think it's very hard to say that the product just sells itself. And look, it depends on the market. I mean, sometimes the product may be great, but working through the politics of an organization, no product can do that, right? Or say you're in a regulated industry, in that sense, you can't install the product in many, many instances, right? So I think product sells itself may be nirvana, but my experience, it's always some level of blend. I mean, even take like an Atlassian who's famous. Like if you look at their IPO deck and you go back and read the rest one, it's a sort of almost to the level that Salesforce says no software, Atlassian said no sales, if you read it. But when you speak with folks that are there and the company, they had roles that they quasi described as like follow-uppers that were human beings that if you had a problem or had a question or didn't quite understand something, like you could reach out to a human being and get help. So that's not a product selling itself by my measure. That's getting help from a human being. And I think that's okay. And I think in any of these models, you need to have a spectrum by what you mean. And even for us, when we think of PLG, I think of it differently for selling to markets or different customer bases. If I'm selling to a very large organization, we're going to have a human involved. And guess what? Those organizations expect it. And if you're transforming a business with your software, do you think that you can do that without actually talking to people and understanding their needs and tailoring things to their business? No, of course not. Like, no. Just out-of-box experience can be as transformative as I think some products are. So I think those terms like products, they don't necessarily serve the community because it's overly simplistic view of these models.
What are the implications for, let's just start with a marketing organization. You haven't mentioned marketing yet, but you started to just then in that explanation. What are the implications for a marketing team selling a product-led to whatever it may be, or a company that starts with some sort of freemium model or some sort of try before you buy motion?
Well, I mean, it's huge. And I'll try to do my best decomposing this question because it's a meaty question. But look, go back in time, historically speaking. Marketer's job, obviously, to solicit demand. So they're getting word out there. And then when folks are coming in, they're trying to measure some level of intent to buy, right? And we think about this concept of a marketing qualified lead. Marketing qualified leads are generally speaking scored by what they're doing. Okay, they went to an event, they went to our website, downloaded a white paper, maybe went to a webinar, score. This basically generates this concept of a marketing qualified lead. And then the action there is surfacing that to some level, like maybe some sales professional for our next step. Now you add the product into it, it opens up other options. So one of the things that we do on our website, and a number of the companies do now, is we have a self-guided tour. The other fact, I glossed over really fast. You also have these things called IDRs, or inbound demo requests. That's someone hitting your button like, I want a demo. That's obviously a very good sense of demand. Like it's such good intent. They're saying, hey, I want this thing, that they're telling you they want this thing. So we have those things. We have customers saying they want this thing. We have these measures of like behavior that we think leads to intent. And then over the time, we've added this concept in the middle we call a self-guided tour, which people like using a real version of our product, but with like mocked data. And to us, like if you're willing to go through and actually use something and play around with it, that is definitely like probably stronger than an MQL, but not quite a, hey, I want to buy this product. It's somewhere in the middle. So there, we kind of think of that as product-led sales engineering. Because a sales engineer would normally do a demo, or very often do a demo, or sometimes our AEs do as well, of course. But like constructing a demo experience and making it completely product-led, don't need to talk to a human, don't need to schedule a time, is a really interesting marketing source, and sits kind of in between this IDR and MQL. That market just honestly blew up. And there's like 3 or 4 vendors that all do this now, and kind of came out of nowhere. But I think is a really interesting way that marketers can think about, generally speaking, PLG. The other thing is now that we have all this inbound demand, we also can funnel them to a freemium experience. And if you have a freemium experience, then you can look at their behavior and say, okay, what areas of the product are they using? And is that some sort of intent to convert? Henceforth, that's what we call a product qualified lead, or PQL. That is very similar to an MQL, but it's based on product data instead of, MQL's marketing data, hitting a webinar, et cetera. And that's another form of demand that can be very, very valuable. Because if I go tell a sales rep, hey, this person's been spending 6 months in our free product and have hit everything, maybe they want to pay for it, right? Seems like a pretty logical thing, right? And one could argue if someone's using something a lot for 6 months, that's maybe better intent than someone going to a webinar where they may just wanting to better themselves and learn more, right? So that's another area where I think marketing, PLG has a huge impact over marketing. But then from there, I think as we think about it, we start looking at the future of optimizing where we direct inbound demand based on segment, based on where they think the best experience for them is. I think that's where the future is. I think, now, for example, you go to our websites based on what we think, the size of your company is. We're going to actually create almost a bespoke experience. Where if you're a larger company, you're probably going to get directed towards humans. If you're a smaller company, you're probably going to get directed to a freemium product. And I think that's a great way to kind of meet the customer where they are.
That's the key point, Todd, there at the end, is that this movement, this product-led movement, isn't happening by accident. It isn't happening because you, Todd Olson, say that it's something that we should do. It's happening because it's how people want to buy. People want to self-serve their own education. They want to get their hands dirty using a product before they commit to buying it. And so you're meeting the market where they are when you are implementing this product-led strategy. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, of course. It's absolutely a big piece of it. I mean, this is a good strategy or a bad strategy, or like it's a necessary strategy because customers expect and demand this. It's what they want. Like if on 8 p.m. on a Friday night over a glass of wine, someone wants to play around with a handful of products, don't you want to be one of those products? Or do you want to be left out because you're requiring them to like schedule a qual call with an SDR, would then get passed to an AE, then get passed to some, like, no. Like if that's when someone's evaluating, like, you want to be in the fray, and you be in the fray by creating experiences that allow them to self-select in a trial. And I think, look, different buyers want different experiences. I think this is critically important.
Really useful thoughts for filling the funnel. You talked to us about MQLs and how we can interpret intent for the demand that we're creating. You talked about product qualified leads and just the different type of intent signal we're getting there. Huge ramifications for marketers, great feedback loop for marketers. Let's now get a little bit further down the funnel and talk about product-led sales. What's your definition of product-led sales, and how are you seeing this manifest at companies?
Well, again, it's a spectrum, right? And I think there are a set of companies that have, for certain segments, typically more SMB focused, they can have a product-led sales motion, which is relatively frictionless, relatively minimal human involved. That's like one end of the spectrum. Let's go to the very opposite end, where you have a sales team actively engaged very, very early, but they're doing some sort of assisted trial, right? Like, we've been doing trials for years in our industry, and it's absolutely a form of product-led sales. It is letting them touch, letting them play with the software. In some cases, we're trying to validate something because the prospect has a question like, hey, we want to validate this actually works in our environment. But the product matters there. If it's a bad experience, you will lose that deal. I don't care how good your sales reps are, right? So I think that's where the sales team knows how to guide people throughout a product and get to some sort of end game. So if those are two spectrums, I think we see everything in the middle as well. And, product-led growth can go very hand in hand with sales. Like, here's a great, more recent story that we are experimenting with. Let's say we have an enterprise customer come in and they're interested. They want to learn more. They heard about this concepts and they get on the phone. They have no budget. They don't have an active buying cycle. They just want to learn more. Now, here's the question. Do you want your sales reps going into an assisted trial? Because look, they want to learn more. They'll probably play with the software. But now I have a sales rep, potentially a sales engineer, guiding someone who has no budget, no need, no active buying cycle. Well, one could argue maybe that team's time is better spent with someone that does have budget, or prospecting and searching for folks that have budget. And maybe that team can send someone, like proactively say, hey, we've got a free product. It's great. If you're just trying to learn more, go here, play around with it. And then maybe when you're ready, let us know and we'll come back to you. And then that team can watch that individual using it. And if it continues, they can always check back in. But I mean, we're all looking at ways we can drive more efficiencies in our business. And we're all thinking about how people use their time wisely. And here's an idea where free actually can be a service to your team of all segments. Send them there if they're just tire kickers and want to learn more and are just trying to be interested. Because in this economy, especially where budgets are tighter and more constrained, you want your team focusing on something that can actually lead to a viable outcome rather than folks that are just trying to learn.
You read my mind, because the implications for this macro environment can't be overstated. You want your team focused on the right people at the right accounts at the right time. And the inverse of that is also true. You don't want them spending time on something that's never going to turn into revenue. They just can't afford that. Sales cycles are getting a little longer right now anyway. Converting things is a little harder right now anyway. You need your team focused on the things that are actually going to affect the bottom line. And so using these signals that you're getting from this product-led orchestration that you have seems like the right way to do it. Now, you mentioned something interesting, Todd, which is some people might not know they have a product-led strategy. You mentioned free trials. We've been doing this forever. What other types of product-led strategies are you seeing that many companies maybe are sleeping on right now?
Look, I think self-service is one of the easiest to hottest areas. Everyone's worried about support volume, increasing and people having issues. So, we see everything from chatbots to in-product help and documentation to guided tours and product. Just examples of some of which we provide, but others we don't. But that's all a form of self-service. And that's another example, going back to the phrase we used earlier. That's meeting the customer where they are. Do you think they want to send an email, wait, 3 hours, and then have to go back and forth to resolve their issue? No one wants that. Yeah, I always joke, there's a reason why there's so many self-help videos on the internet. It's because we like learning and helping ourselves. So I see companies do this. I see banks do this. I see large organizations do this. But I think this is an area which we don't talk enough about. But how can the product, reduce volume here when something does go wrong? And one of the other things I like to challenge teams with, you shouldn't need humans to teach a user how to use a product. Mm-hmm. And all too often we do. And so I think at the very least, we should be develop some level of product-led onboarding, so that if you're new to a product, new to an experience, it shows you around and helps you understand how to get best value out of it. Because having to wait to jump on an onboarding call, and that's pain. Or watch a 20-minute video. No one wants to do that. You want to get in there and start using it. That's what all of us want to do. And consumer companies know how to do this. Go use Dropbox. That's I guess quasi-consumer example. Go use TikTok, which I guess may not be okay, don't use TikTok, depending on if you're in the government, etc. Let's use maybe Facebook as a less controversial. It was shocking that I'm using Facebook as less controversial, but it is. They're going to teach you how to use the product. They're going to have little signals, little pop-ups. They're going to have little suggestions. That's just, they have to. I think B2B products should be doing the exact same thing too.
I had a version of this conversation, Todd, with Nick Mehta from Gainsight. And one of the things that he was hitting on is that, hey, you're selling your product. You've probably been at your company for a handful of years. You know your product so well, and you take a lot of that for granted. And so when you sign that new customer and they're in implementation, you're like, all right, my work here is done. They're going to be able to use the product as proficiently as I can. And that is just completely wrong. People don't take the time, as you said, that even if it's a 15-minute, 20-minute video, think about it yourself, listeners at home. When was the last time you sat down and watched a 20-minute, 30-minute onboarding or how-to video for whatever your favorite product may be? My guess is probably not that recently. And so I mentioned this before, but you literally wrote the book on this topic. And I'm curious to get some advice for executives, for product strategists, for any execs out there. The book you wrote is called The Product-Led Organization: Drive Growth by Putting Product at the Center of Your Customer Experience. Talk to us about how to do that. What would you tell an executive who's like, man, this sounds compelling. Where do I start?
Yeah. So look, in the book, we kind of lay out three main sections or areas. And I think that's the great roadmap for how to start this concept of being product led. First is making sure you kind of institute a culture of being data driven, specifically within your product. I think it's hard to start making adjustments, changes, like look at how to go, from here. If you don't have just a baseline of what's going on inside your product, getting a good sense of how your company goals, and then working backwards and start to form some product goals and start making sure you're looking at leading indicators of those so you can start quickly iterating. I think one of the things that honestly is an attribute of almost every product-led organization I see, and in particular product-led growth, is this experimental mindset. So for example, our product-led growth team, they run about 4 to 5 experiments at any one given time. And they're constantly measuring and adjusting and tweaking. And each one they have a thesis. Hey, we think we can drive this number, which ties to this outcome, if we run this little experiment. And I think that's one of the first things you can start instituting within your business, start making change. So that's kind of area one. The second is start thinking about how the product can offload some of these, let's call them high volume, lower value tasks from your humans. I come back to support again. Maybe it's onboarding. Maybe it's, in the marketing, one of the other examples I like to use is like driving references. Like if you have happy users, we know they're happy users. Shouldn't we be directing them to review sites, something to that effect, like proactively? That should be part of the experience. That's another potential low-hanging fruit we can do. But there's a lot of these like very high volume, low value activities that we have humans that are businesses doing that are ripe for automation. They're ripe for product just handling on behalf of those organizations. So that's kind of the next area, and start plucking those off one by one. Start running experiments and getting ROI. And so that'll help prove out the value of these techniques. And then the last piece is like, you got to set the right organizational ownership. And we've seen the rise of product operations teams as a way to be sort of this conduit or liaison between different organizations. But I think inherently, one of the most interesting things about PLG is that it's very cross-functional. I mean, you asked me about sales, you asked me about marketing already. You just alluded to customer success. Our growth team on an org chart lives within product. However, that person sort of has dotted lines to a full-time marketer, full-time liaisons to sales. And if we didn't have those connections, she wouldn't be successful in her role. Because if, someone, is using our free product and has a question, like some other department is involved in that interaction, it needs to be smooth and the handoffs need to be tight. It needs to be a good experience. So I think that's critical. When you're establishing your growth teams, wherever they live, they need to be incredibly cross-functional, and we keep them just a little bit separate than the rest of our teams because they are running fast and they are running experiments regularly.
You just hit on different areas and workflows all over the business: support and ticket deflection, onboarding and adoption, references from really happy users proactively from a marketing standpoint. So just off the top of my head, you're talking about improving CAC, you're talking about improving gross margin, you're talking about improving net dollar retention. Any other key metrics that you feel like a product-led strategy could have a major impact on?
I mean, that was a lot of metrics right there. I was just trying to think, probably, I'm sure there are other ones, but obviously gross margin as well. I don't know if you hit gross margin. It should obviously do that as well. So in just terms of pure operating costs. But, certainly today we talked a little bit about the macroeconomic environment. We talked about efficiencies with respect to like sales and sales time. But obviously a lot of us are looking at how we can drive higher magic numbers, things like that. And when we're looking at the market, and we serve a broad market, small companies and large companies, we look at, you go back to CAC. What's the CAC of closing a small customer? And if we can find ways to optimize that for our business, that allows us to invest more upmarket so that we can, take those same human beings and focus them on much larger transactions, which are going to basically be a much higher LTV to CAC ratio for us long term. So that's kind of how I structurally think about it. Yeah, I think if you're not doing it, there's a good chance you're going to be left behind.
I love those implications. A lot of what we're talking about here, Todd, is about running revenue efficiently, but really more broadly, you're talking about running your company efficiently. This is the expectation that the market has now. And so if you're sleeping on this strategy as a means to unlock some of that efficiency, like you just said, you are going to get left behind. So let's now talk about how you're doing this at Pendo. You have a Pendo free product. If I'm correct, you've had this offering for some time, but you haven't had a sales team against this for some time. So talk to us a little bit about Pendo free and how you've brought this from experiment to real life product line.
Yeah, so we launched our most recent version of Pendo Free in November of 2020. So this is another example of where, kind of looking at the pandemic and how the world changed, what do we want to accomplish this year? And we actually invested very heavy in a new free experience. And we're very inspired, actually, if you go back and look at MailChimp as a great case study, 2 downturns ago or whatever, the 2008 downturn, is when they invested in it and they really saw it have an inflection point in their business. So we're kind of inspired by that case study and invested heavy. Now, I say it's the most recent because we had launched free twice before. So we've kind of had it on and had it off throughout the company's history. Certainly very early days we did. We had it up and running and made several conversions in about 2017, 2018. Decided we didn't like it, turned it off, and then turned it back on in 2020. And I think part of how we think, we collect a lot of data. If I don't like something or we don't love it as a company, we'll shut it down, reformulate it, and then relaunch it. So our most recent version launched in 2020. We've seen really stellar growth. I think a lot of the learnings from the prior versions have been kind of incorporated into this most recent version. We started a few quarters ago in supporting self-service payment. For a while, when you're using freemium, if you wanted to actually buy, you had to speak with a sales team that allowed this sales team collaboration. And that was actually by design, because when we didn't have free, of course, everyone was speaking to sales teams and everyone was getting quota relief. And that team, frankly, was operating really, really well. It's a team that has really missed. So when we started introducing free, what we didn't want to do is create panic in a team that had never missed. So we started coming up with hybrid ways. Now, over time, we've started adding in self-service purchase. We're working now on self-service upgrade and expansions and renewals. We now have that same team that we had has been successful. We've adjusted them so that now they're sort of a PLG assist team, where they're working hand in hand with the PLG team, but they're looking for outliers, folks that are a little bit bigger than the average one that may need a little bit of help, or folks that are getting stuck and finding ways to nudge them along, or folks that are good candidates that aren't quite responding to some of our product-led means where we're bringing in humans to help assist, because we're all still learning. Hey, what's working and not working that is, within our conversion funnel, so that we can start, again, trying to find ways to better automate. But yeah, we have full-time people. That's all they do. They basically help that team drive its numbers, essentially.
Absolutely love that, Todd. Drinking your own champagne. So we are unfortunately at time here. I can't believe it. Absolutely flew by. I have a bonus question at the end here. Aside from the product-led organization, because that does not count, I'm curious for you to recommend a book to us. You already mentioned the 4 Steps to the Epiphany, but are there any other books you would recommend for executives who want to have a better grasp on product development or want to have a better grasp on product-led growth?
Well, I also mentioned The Lean Startup. That's another great book. I like to promote Melissa Perry's The Build Trap. I think it's a great book. It talked about general purpose product management, but I think if you're not good at product management, you're not going to probably be good at PLG. So that's another one that I think it's worth reading.
Very good. Thank you so much for the time, Todd. This was amazing. A masterclass in all things product-led. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks again for joining the show.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Don't let what you heard today go to waste. Take 2 minutes to download today's checklist to get your priorities in line for the week. You can find that linked in our show notes. And if you liked what you heard, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. We'll be back next Monday with more to help you win your week.